He thought he could get away with abusing me and my mother for 20 years. He didn't know I had cloud-based security cameras recording everything and would use them to destroy his life. My name is Daniel. For 20 years, I lived in the shadow of a man who was supposed to be a protector but chose to be a tyrant. But before I share how I found the strength to stand up to him on the most important day of my life, I want to speak to you. If you know the feeling of a silent house filled with tension, if you've ever forced a smile to hide a childhood fear, then you already understand the foundation of my story. If you're ready to witness the moment a victim becomes a victor, then like, share, and subscribe to the Revenge Stories. Your engagement helps us share these crucial tales of justice and boundary setting. Now, let's begin. The man was my stepfather, Frank. He entered my life when I was 7, a whirlwind of loud laughter, firm handshakes, and the scent of cheap cologne and cigarettes. To my young eyes, he seemed like a giant, a superhero who had arrived to save my mom and me from the quiet struggle of our lives. My mom, Eleanor, a gentle soul whose spirit had been frayed by the exhaustion of single parenthood, saw in him a rock, a provider. She looked at him with a hope I hadn't seen in years, and I, wanting nothing more than her happiness, mirrored that hope. We were both desperate to believe in the fairy tale, but the rock quickly revealed itself to be a millstone, and the fairy tale became a slow-burning nightmare. Our small house, which should have been a sanctuary, became Frank's sovereign territory. His word was law, his mood the barometer for our daily weather. A good mood meant sullen silence. A bad mood meant a storm of criticism and controlled rage that we navigated with the careful, silent steps of prisoners in our own home. My mother's bright spirit, which had once filled our home with music and laughter, became muted. Her laughter was replaced by a nervous, tinkling sound she used to placate him. She learned to make herself small, to agree, to anticipate his needs and demands in a constant, exhausting dance of appeasement. I watched the light in her eyes dim year by year, and a helpless fury began to simmer deep within my soul. The pattern of his cruelty was not one of dramatic violence, but of 1,000 paper cuts to our self-worth, a relentless campaign of control and intimidation. Flashback 1, the birthday guitar. When I turned 13, I spent 8 months mowing lawns, bagging groceries, and returning bottles to save $300. I bought a used, sunburst acoustic guitar from a kid at school. It was scratched and a little warped, but to me, it was a spaceship, a time machine, a key to a world beyond my own four walls. The first day I brought it home, I practiced chords until my fingers were raw. Frank watched from his armchair, a cold smirk playing on his lips. "Wasting your time on that noise," he grunted, not looking up from his paper. A real man works with his hands, not plays with them. 3 days later, I came home from school to find the guitar in pieces on the driveway. The wooden body splintered, the strings snapped like nerves. Frank was working on his truck. "Clutter causes accidents," he said, wiping his hands on an oily rag, not a hint of remorse on his face. "Shouldn't have left your junk lying around." My mum tried to comfort me that night, holding me as I cried silent, angry tears. "He didn't mean it, Danny. It was an accident," she whispered. But I could feel the lie in the tension of her body. The message was seared into me. What I loved was insignificant, and my pain was an inconvenience. Flashback 2, the college fund. I was determined to escape. Through high school, I worked 2 jobs, squirreling away every dollar into a locked metal box hidden in the back of my closet. It was my ticket to community college, to a future in computer science. By graduation, I had saved $1,800. The day after I received my acceptance letter, I went to my closet. The box was gone. My heart plummeted into my stomach. I found Frank in the garage. "The money? I needed it," he said, not even pausing as he tinkered with a power tool. "The transmission was shot. You live under my roof, you eat my food, you contribute. That's what family does." There was no discussion, no apology, just a bald-faced assertion of his right to take what was mine. That night, I heard my mom pleading with him through their bedroom wall. "Frank, that was for his future." "That wasn't yours to take!" His response was a roar followed by the sound of something, a lamp, a picture frame, shattering against the wall. "Nothing in this house isn't mine." The argument ended with the sound of my mother sobbing. She never mentioned the money to me again. The frustration of that moment, of seeing my labor, my hope, my future, casually obliterated to feed his entitlement, solidified into a hard, cold knot in my chest. Flashback 3. The graduation. On my high school graduation day, as I stood in my cap and gown, my mom beamed with a pride that almost eclipsed her constant anxiety. She took a dozen photos. As she went to find her seat, Frank pulled me aside, his hand gripping my shoulder too tightly. "Don't get a big head about this," he hissed, his breath smelling of whiskey. "A piece of paper doesn't make you a man. I never finished high school, and I'm the one who puts a roof over your head. Remember that." He couldn't let a single moment of unadulterated joy be purely mine. He had to poison it, to reassert his dominance, to remind me that in his kingdom, I was always a subject. I learned to shrink my achievements, to make myself small and unthreatening. It was a survival tactic, but it chipped away at my soul, year after year. My only true sanctuary became the future I was building for myself, far away from him. It was my career in software engineering, a field he couldn't understand, and therefore despised. It was my separate savings account, opened in a different bank he knew nothing about. And most importantly, it was my relationship with Sophia. She was the sun breaking through my perpetual overcast. She saw the man I was beneath the layers of fear and resentment. She was my refuge, my confidant, the one who made me believe I was worthy of a love that didn't hurt. Our wedding day was supposed to be the final, definitive step into that new life, a day of pure, radiant joy, completely insulated from the shadow of Frank. We had no idea he was about to bring the storm right to the heart of our sanctuary. The wedding was everything Sophia and I had painstakingly planned. The venue was a sun-drenched garden terrace overlooking a serene, glassy lake. The air was sweet with the scent of roses and gardenias. Sophia was incandescent, a vision in white that took my breath away every time I looked at her. My mum, for the first time in years, looked genuinely happy and relaxed. She wore a lovely lavender dress, and her smile, unfiltered by fear, reminded me of the mother I knew as a young child. She held my arm tightly as we walked down the aisle, her eyes shining with tears of pure joy. For a few beautiful hours, the world was perfect. Frank was, unsurprisingly, on his best behavior. He wore the rented tuxedo, shook hands with my friends, and held court with my uncles, playing the part of the proud, slightly rough around the edges patriarch. He basked in the reflected glory of an event he had contributed nothing to. I watched him warily, a familiar tension coiling in my gut, but I pushed it down. Just get through the day, I told myself. Don't let him ruin this. The betrayal happened as the reception was in full swing. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over everything. We were about to cut the cake, a magnificent, three-tiered creation that Sophia had designed herself. Laughter and warm chatter filled the air. Frank had been steadily drinking, and his boisterousness was tipping into loud, performative belligerence. He was telling a crude, off-color joke to a group of my college friends and Sophia's cousins, who were listening with polite, frozen smiles. I saw Sophia's slight wince from across the room. I moved in, my own smile strained, trying to gently deflect. I put a hand on his shoulder. "Hey Frank, that's enough for now. Let's keep it classy for the photos, yeah?" It was as if I had thrown a switch in a dangerous machine. His face darkened instantly. The affable mask vanished, replaced by the naked contempt I knew so well. The air around us grew cold. "Don't you ever tell me what to do," he slurred, his voice dropping to a low, venomous register that was meant only for me. The group around us fell silent. "You think you're a big man now? In your fancy suit? You're still the same scared little boy hiding in his room, counting his pennies." I could feel the eyes of everyone on us. I saw my mum's face from across the cake table, her expression shifting from contentment to terror in a heartbeat. "Frank, not here," I said, my voice low and steady, though my heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "This is our day. Sophia's and mine. Let it go." "Your day?" He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that cut through the music. "You entitled little shit. I paid for your food, your clothes, the roof over your head for 15 years. You owe me for this whole damn life! You think you're better than me?" And then it happened. In front of my new wife, my friends, my colleagues, and my entire family, in the center of my perfect day, he drew back his hand and slapped me across the face with a force that snapped my head to the side. The sound was like a gunshot in the stunned silence. A sharp, stinging heat bloomed on my cheek. Time seemed to slow. I saw Sophia's hands fly to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and horror. I saw my best man, Alex, take a step forward, his fists clenched. I saw the look of triumphant fury on Frank's face. This was his line in the sand. He had violated the one day that was sacred, the sanctuary of my new beginning, and he had done it in the most humiliating way possible. But something inside me didn't break. It didn't even bend. It solidified into something harder than steel. The scared little boy he was talking about finally died in that moment. I looked at Sophia's tear-filled eyes. I looked at my mom's horrified, ashamed expression, and I felt a seismic shift. The emotion, the decades of hurt, the humiliation, drained away, replaced by a cold, clear, strategic fury that was far more powerful than any anger I had ever felt. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply turned my head back to look at him, my gaze steady and utterly calm. I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his bloodshot eyes. He was expecting me to cower, to cry, to beg. He was not expecting this. Enough, I said, my voice low but carrying in the dead quiet. You're done. I moved faster than he could react. I grabbed the wrist of the arm he had just used to hit me, my grip like a vice. I was no longer the scrawny kid he used to push around. Years of determined gym sessions had seen to that. He was bigger, but he was drunk, off balance, and unprepared for my strength. I twisted his arm behind his back just enough to control him, not to fight him. What the hell do you think you're doing? He sputtered, struggling against my hold. Spittle flew from his lips. Removing the trash, I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. And I marched him. I walked him, stumbling and protesting through the gaping crowd. I didn't look left or right. I kept my eyes forward, guiding his ungainly shuffle past the cake table, through the tables of stunned guests, straight out of the main French doors and onto the gravel driveway. I released him with a sharp shove that sent him sprawling onto the sharp stones. If you take one step back towards that door, I said, standing over him, I will have you arrested for assault. The security has already seen everything. I turned my back on him, a final, deliberate act of dismissal. I walked back into my wedding, my head high, and nodded to the 2 private security guards I had, at Sophia's wise insistence, hired for the event. They moved to the doorway, their postures making it clear that Frank was no longer welcome. The outrage from the guests was now a roaring in my ears, but it wasn't directed at me. It was directed at the pathetic figure scrambling to his feet in the driveway. The spell was broken. Everyone had seen the monster unmasked. Back inside, the wedding was irrevocably broken. The joy had been siphoned out of the room. Sophia rushed to me, her hands gently cupping my face. Your cheek. Oh, Daniel, are you okay? Her touch was gentle, but her eyes were blazing with a protective fury I had never seen in her. I will be, I said, and I truly meant it. The path forward was suddenly crystal clear. This was no longer a family dispute. It was a war for our future peace, and Frank had just fired the first, very public shot. The time for passive survival was over. The time for active, strategic dismantling had begun. The first move was financial, targeting the source of his lazy dominance. For years, out of a twisted sense of duty and, more importantly, to create a buffer for my mom, I had been providing Frank with a generous monthly allowance. He had quit his job as a mechanic years ago, claiming a bad back, and had become entirely reliant on my success. It was my final tether to him, the last lever he could pull. That night, from the quiet of our honeymoon suite, I logged into my bank's app and permanently cancelled the automated transfer. I was cutting off his supply line. It was a declaration of war he would understand in the most visceral way. The backlash was immediate, just as I knew it would be. My phone began to vibrate incessantly on the nightstand. Frank had launched his smear campaign, working the phones, twisting the narrative. My Uncle Carl was the first. Daniel, what in God's name happened? Frank says you attacked him, that you threw your own father out of your wedding and assaulted him. My Aunt Brenda texted. He's devastated. He says you've cut your poor disabled stepfather off with no warning. How could you be so cruel after all he's done for you? This was his territory. Manipulating perceptions, playing the wounded victim, using the family's desire for peace as a weapon. But I was done playing defense. I remembered the advice of Beatrice Crowe, the retired attorney I had met during a previous conflict. I called her. Say nothing, she commanded, her voice crisp and clear over the phone. Do not engage. Do not justify, argue, defend, or explain. Every response you give him is oxygen. Let him dig his hole. While he's flailing, you need to think bigger. You need undeniable, irrefutable proof that can't be twisted by his lies. I needed a weapon, and I realized with a jolt that I had been gathering the components for years, without even knowing I was building an arsenal. It started with the cameras. About 5 years ago, under the guise of concern for my mum's safety when I was traveling for work, I had installed a comprehensive, discreet, cloud-based CCTV system throughout her house. My stated reason was to check on her. My unspoken reason was to keep an eye on Frank. He was too technologically illiterate to understand that the small, discreet cameras in the living room, kitchen, and hallway saved their footage automatically and permanently to a remote server he couldn't access or destroy. I spent the next 2 days of what was supposed to be my honeymoon in a grim, determined pursuit. While Sophia slept, exhausted from the emotional turmoil, I sat at the small desk in our hotel room, my laptop open, reviewing years of archived footage. It was a heartbreaking, soul-wrenching task. I fast-forwarded through days of mundane life, watching my mum move through the house like a ghost, her shoulders perpetually hunched as if expecting a blow. But I struck gold. I found multiple clips that made my blood run cold. There was Frank, his face contorted with rage, screaming at my mum for burning dinner, standing so close she was backed against the kitchen counter. There was another of him shoving her out of his way as he stormed into the living room, causing her to stumble against the arm of the sofa. But the most damning clip, the one that sealed his fate, was from just a few months prior. The timestamp showed a Tuesday afternoon. The camera in the living room clearly showed Frank waiting for my mum to leave for her grocery shopping. The moment her car pulled out of the driveway, he went into my old bedroom. He emerged minutes later with the small metal lockbox where I used to keep important documents. I watched, my stomach churning, as he used a small pry bar from his toolbox to snap the cheap lock. He reached in and pulled out a thick wad of cash, $500 I had left there for emergencies after fixing a leak in their bathroom. He pocketed it with a casualness that spoke of long practice, then tossed the broken box back into the closet. He was still stealing from me. The method was the same, only the target's age had changed. This was my arsenal. This was the evidence that would shift the narrative from a he said argument about a slap to an undeniable, visual and audio record of long-term psychological abuse, physical intimidation, and theft. My final strategic move was to secure my mom, to get her out of the line of fire. I called her, not to discuss Frank or the wedding, but to offer her a lifeline. "Mom, I have a first-class ticket booked for you to come stay with us in our guest house for a while. Just a break, no questions asked, no pressure to do anything, just peace and quiet." She was hesitant, her voice trembling. Decades of psychological abuse had conditioned her to fear his wrath, to believe she deserved her situation. "I don't know, Danny, Frank, he's so upset." "Mom," I said, my voice soft but firm. "He slapped your son on his wedding day, in front of everyone. He is not the victim here. You are not responsible for his feelings. Please, let me do this for you." The silence on the other end was long, then a small choked sob. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, I'll come." When Frank realized she was gone and the money had stopped, his calls turned from angry bluster to desperate, panicked pleading. He begged, he threatened, he even wept, his voice cracking over the voicemail. "Daniel, please, you're my son. I need that money. I'm your family." I recorded every call. The satisfaction of building my case, piece by irrefutable piece, of knowing I held all the power now, was a balm to my wounded spirit. The scared child was gone. In his place was a calm, methodical strategist, patiently and precisely preparing for the final, absolute reckoning. I did not send the videos to the family one by one. That would have allowed for excuses, minimization, and behind-the-scenes manipulation. Instead, I orchestrated a single, coordinated, undeniable unveiling designed to destroy his false narrative in one fell swoop. I created a private, password-protected video portal on a secure server. It contained 3 edited, clearly labeled clips. The slap, the footage from the wedding venue's security camera, which I had formally requested and obtained, showing the entire altercation in clear, damning detail. The theft, the CCTV footage of him stealing the cash from my lockbox. The abuse, a montage of the most egregious moments of him screaming at and manhandling my mother. I then composed a single email. I added every single family member, aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, even a few old family friends who had been fed his lies. The subject line was simple and unemotional. The truth about Frank. The body of the email was brief and clinical. For many years, some of you have been aware of tension within our family. You have heard Frank's version of events. You have heard his claims about me. And you have witnessed the aftermath of his conflict with my mother. Out of a desire for peace and for my mother's protection, I have remained silent. That ends now. Below is a link to a private portal. The password is the name of the street we lived on when I was a child. What you see and hear is unedited. This is the man you have been defending. This is the truth my mother and I have lived with for 20 years. Daniel. I took a deep breath and clicked send. The digital arrow was loosed. I then turned off my phone. The waiting began. The collapse of Frank's reputation was swift, total, and merciless. When I turned my phone back on hours later, it was flooded with notifications, dozens of missed calls and text messages. But this time, the tone was entirely different. It was a chorus of horror, apology, and rage, directed at the right target. My Uncle Carl, who had first chastised me, called, his voice thick with emotion. Daniel, my God, son, I saw the videos. I am so sorry. I had no idea. That monster, your poor mother, my Aunt Brenda. I am sick to my stomach. All these years, we never knew. Please forgive me for what I said. He is dead to me. Frank's phone, however, began to ring with a different, more furious tone. I learned later that his own brothers, men he had always looked up to, called him. They didn't just yell. They eviscerated him. They called him a coward, a bully, a disgrace to the family name. He was utterly isolated, his support system evaporating in the heat of the truth. 2 days later, he showed up at my house, a broken, pathetic shell of a man. Sophia and I watched him on the high-definition doorbell camera. He was disheveled, his clothes wrinkled, his eyes wild and red-rimmed. He looked like he hadn't slept. Daniel, please, we need to talk. You have to let me in. I waited a long moment, letting him squirm on the doorstep, letting the camera capture his desperation. Then I opened the door but stood firmly in the frame, not inviting him in. Sophia stood a few feet behind me, a silent pillar of strength. You have 30 seconds, I said, my voice flat. Delete the videos, he begged, his voice cracking, his hands trembling. Please, you have to take them down. My own brother won't speak to me. My friends, they've seen it. You're ruining my life. I looked at him, the tyrant of my childhood, the source of so much pain, now reduced to begging on my doorstep. There was no pity in my heart, only a cold sense of finality. The videos stay up until you do 2 things, I said, my voice ice cold and precise. First, you will write a full detailed confession. You will send it as an email to every single person on that list. You will admit you lied about the wedding. You will admit you stole from me, both as a child and as an adult. You will detail your abusive behavior toward my mother. Second, you will come to a family gathering I am organizing at Uncle Carl's this Sunday, and you will apologize to me directly